The human female's screams echoed through the Loran torture chamber as Vox repeatedly stabbed her with the electrified pain rod. He didn't realize that by capturing this girl he had just signed the death warrant for his entire species. "I must say this one has spirit," Vox laughed as he finally turned off the rod. The human prisoner, Natalie, slumped in her restraints, blood dripping from her many wounds. "She's lasted longer than any other human we've captured." "How long until she breaks, Zar?" Zar shifted uneasily, keeping his eyes averted from the gruesome scene before him. "I don't know, sir, but maybe we should stop. I've heard rumors about humans. They say they'll stop at nothing if you harm their children or mates. This Natalie we've captured is apparently the daughter of one of their most elite soldiers. What if he comes for her?" Vox scoffed dismissively, picking his sharp teeth with the gore-encrusted pain rod. "Let him come. These primitive apes are no match for Loran might. How many of their pathetic colonies have we conquered just in the last cycle? We'll defeat this elite soldier just like all the rest, besides with his daughter as leverage. What can he do? He'll have no choice but to surrender and reveal all of Earth's weaknesses to us," Zar conceded, though doubt still flickered in his eyes. "The Emperor himself has decreed Earth will fall, so its resources can fuel our empire's expansion. These humans don't stand a chance." Vox nodded, a wicked grin splitting his reptilian face as he turned back to the prisoner. "Yes, and torturing this female will be the key to crushing their resistance once and for all. The humans' ridiculous attachment to their offspring will be their downfall." Just then, a shrill alarm blared through the compound, cutting him off. Vox frowned and activated his comm. "What's going on? Report." "Sir, we've detected an incoming vessel. It's human, and it's heading straight for the prison. Our defense perimeter has already been breached." Vox and Zar exchanged worried glances, an unspoken realization passing between them. The human father was coming, and he was already here. As the alarms continued to blare, Vox and Zar rushed to the security monitors, their eyes widening in disbelief at the carnage unfolding before them. A lone human male, armed with sleek, deadly-looking weapons of unknown design, tore through the Loran guards like they were made of paper. His movements were a blur, each shot finding its mark with uncanny precision. Zar leaned forward, squinting at the screen, then tapped a few keys, zooming in on the intruder's face. The blood drained from his own as recognition set in. "By the Emperor, that's Lawrence Bryant, the prisoner's father." Vox snarled, slamming his fist on the console. "What? How did we not know this?" His eyes blazed with fury as he realized they had grossly underestimated this particular human. Zar's fingers flew over the controls, pulling up the military records they had on Lawrence Bryant. His eyes widened further as he scanned the information. "He's not just an officer, sir, he's a highly decorated super soldier, genetically enhanced and trained in advanced combat tactics that we've never seen before." Vox leaned over Zar's shoulder, reading the records for himself. A chill ran down his spine as he saw the long list of battles Lawrence had single-handedly turned in the human's favor. "The Reaper," Vox muttered, using the nickname their kind had given this fearsome warrior. On the screens, Lawrence continued his relentless advance, dispatching dozens of the best Loran soldiers with a speed and skill that seemed impossible for a mere human. Zar swallowed hard, tearing his eyes away from the monitors. "Sir, we need to sound the retreat. He's cutting through our men like they're nothing. We can't stop him." Vox whirled on Zar, teeth bared. "No, we will not run from this primate. All units converge on the intruder's position. Surround him." Zar gaped at Vox in disbelief. "Are you mad? We need to cut our losses and evacuate. This human, he'll kill us all." A cruel smile twisted Vox's lips. "We're not running. This is our chance, don't you see? If we can capture him, break him, it will demoralize the entire human resistance. They'll crumble without their greatest hero." Zar shook his head but said nothing more as they watched Lawrence carve a path of destruction deeper into the compound. Vox paced, his claws gouging furrows in the console, frustration mounting with each soldier that fell to the human's blades and bullets. Minutes dragged by, feeling like hours. Zar studied the route Lawrence was taking, and a terrible realization dawned. "Sir, he's heading for the cell block for his daughter." Vox paused, a slow, vicious grin spreading across his face. "Then that's where we'll spring our trap. He may be a super soldier, but every man has his weakness, and we have as he activated his comm. All units, pull back to cell block A7. Prepare an ambush. We use the female as bait." Just as Vox was about to give the order to spring the ambush, an urgent transmission from Loran High Command interrupted him. The screen flickered to life, revealing the scowling visage of the Loran Emperor himself. Commander Vox the Emperor growled, his deep voice dripping with displeasure. I demand an update on the situation at once. Why have I received reports of a human infiltrator wreaking havoc in one of our most secure facilities? Vox's previous bravado evaporated under the Emperor's withering glare. He stammered out a response. Your Eminence, I assure you we have the situation under control. The intruder will be captured momentarily. But the Emperor narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. Is that so? Then how do you explain the dozens of casualties already reported? This Lawrence Bryant seems to be making a mockery of our defenses. Tsar, sensing an opportunity to undercut his rival, chimed in. If I may, Your Eminence, Commander Vox did initially dismiss the threat posed by this particular human. He believed our forces would easily overwhelm him. Vox paled, the memory of that disastrous security breach still fresh in his mind. Lawrence Bryant had single-handedly infiltrated the heavily guarded compound and made off with several pieces of advanced weapons technology, setting back the Loren arms development by years. The Emperor continued, his tone scathing. And what of the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where Bryant and a handful of human commandos managed to destroy our primary supply base, costing us control of the entire sector? Vox shrank under the weight of his leader's anger, while Tsar struggled to suppress a smug grin. The Emperor leaned forward, his image dominating the screen. Let me make this abundantly clear. Commander, you will capture or kill Lawrence Bryant. Failure is not an option. If he escapes, I will personally strip you of your rank and cast you to the furthest reaches of the Empire. Do I make myself clear? Vox nodded vigorously, sweat beading on his brow. Yes, Your Eminence, I will not fail you. As the transmission ended, alarms blared throughout the compound, red lights flashing in warning. Tsar checked the security feeds, his expression grim. Vox slammed his fist against the console, desperation and anger warring on his features. All remaining troops, converge on the cell block immediately. I want every available soldier in there. We'll drown him in bodies if we have to. Tsar hesitated, then spoke up. Commander, if I may suggest an alternative approach. Vox whirled on him, eyes wild. What could possibly work against this human monster? A cruel smile played across Tsar's lips. We still have his daughter. Perhaps it's time we used her as a shield. Even the great Lawrence Bryant would hesitate to risk his child's life. Vox's eyes narrowed. Then slowly, he nodded. Do it. Bring the girl to the cell block. We'll force Bryant to surrender, or watch his daughter die before his eyes. Vox and Tsar burst into Natalie's cell, flanked by a squad of elite Loren guards armed to the teeth. The sight that greeted them was pitiful. The human female, once so spirited and defiant, now hung limply in her restraints, her face a mess of bruises and blood. Vox strode forward, roughly grabbing Natalie by the hair and yanking her head up. He pressed the barrel of his plasma pistol against her temple, the weapon humming with deadly energy. Call to your father, Vox snarled, his reptilian eyes boring into hers. Tell him to surrender, or I'll paint the walls with your brain matter. But Natalie, beaten and broken as she was, simply glared back at Vox, her blue eyes blazing with unbroken defiance. Tsar watched the exchange with a mix of fascination and unease. You have to admire their spirit, Tsar mused, shaking his head. Even in the face of certain death, they refused to yield. It reminds me of the siege on Epsilon Eridani. Vox glanced at his subordinate, his grip on Natalie's hair tightening. What are you babbling about? Tsar leaned against the cell wall, his gaze distant. A human colony on the fringes of their space. We had them surrounded, outnumbered 50-1. By all rights, they should have surrendered within days. He chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. But they held out for months. Somehow they managed to turn their entire city into a fortress. Every time we tried to advance, we'd be met with a hail of gunfire and explosions. Guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks. They made us bleed for every inch. Vox's lip curled in disgust. And yet we still crushed them in the end. True, Tsar conceded, but the losses we sustained. The resources we expended, it was a Pyrrhic victory at best. Vox turned his attention back to Natalie, his patience wearing thin. Enough of this. Call to your father now, or I start removing body parts. Natalie's lips twisted into a bloody smile. You've made a grave mistake, Vox. You think you can break him? You think you can break me? Her laughter rang through the cell, harsh and mocking. My father isn't just a soldier, he's a legend. A man who's overcome every obstacle, every enemy, to protect the ones he loves. Tsar cocked his head, his curiosity piqued. Is that so? And what grand tales do your kind tell of the great Lawrence Bryant? Natalie's smile widened, her teeth stained red. You want stories? I'll give you stories. She shifted in her bonds, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounds. On Antares 9, an Oran slave camp, thousands of humans starving, beaten, hopeless. My father infiltrated the camp alone, fought through legions of guards, dismantled their security systems like they were toys. He led those prisoners to freedom, bringing them home across 100 light-years of hostile space. Vox's grip on his pistol tightened, but Natalie continued, her voice gaining strength. Or the Battle of Proin, when our colony was on the verge of starvation, cut off by your blockade. My father flew a damaged fighter, little more than a wreck, through a gauntlet of your warships. He delivered the medical supplies that saved countless lives. Then led a counterattack that shattered your lines. Zar listened in rapture, despite himself. The tales of human resilience, of the indomitable spirit embodied by Lawrence Bryant, were unlike anything in Loran culture. Vox, however, had heard enough. He pressed the pistol harder against Natalie's skull, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before Natalie could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the cell block. The guards stumbled, their weapons swiveling towards the door as smoke began to pour into the room. Over the ringing in their ears, a voice boomed from the intercom, a voice that struck fear into the hearts of every Loran who heard it. Vox's eyes darted around the cell, seeking an escape, but there was none. The human legend was coming, unstoppable, and Vox knew his only chance was the fragile human shield in his grasp. Back he snarled at his men, dragging Natalie towards the door. Form up around me. The human comes through that door. You fill him with plasma. Zar swallowed hard, his hand shaking as he raised his own weapon. This was at the moment of truth, the Reaper of Earth against the might of the Loran Empire, and he had a sinking feeling he knew which side would emerge victorious. Vox shoved Natalie forward, his claws digging into her arm as he marched her down the corridor. Move, he snarled, the plasma pistol never wavering from her temple. Natalie stumbled, biting back a cry of pain. Her legs felt like lead, her body battered and bruised from the Loran's interrogation, but she refused to give Vox the satisfaction of seeing her break. Zar trailed behind them, his eyes darting nervously between Natalie and the smoke-filled hallway. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. Lawrence was coming. Suddenly, Zar's communicator chimed. He tapped the device, his eyes widening as a holographic image of a battle-scarred Loran appeared. It was Krax, the commander of the Loran fleet orbiting the planet. Report, Krax barked, his reptilian features twisted into a scowl. What's the situation down there? Zar swallowed hard. Sir, the human has breached our defenses. He's cutting through our troops like they're nothing. We can't stop him. Krax's eyes narrowed. Lawrence Bryant, he hissed, the name dripping with venom. I should have known. Krax's hologram flickered as he leaned forward. You know him? Zar asked, his curiosity piqued despite the dire situation. What happened? Krax's gaze grew distant, as if reliving a painful memory. It was at the Tygo shipyards. We thought it was impregnable, guarded by an entire fleet. But Bryant, he led a strike team, just a handful of humans. They slipped past our defenses like ghosts. Vox's eyes widened. Impossible. No human could. They did. Krax snapped. They infiltrated the shipyards, planted explosives on every warship and dock. We lost dozens of ships that day, our fleet crippled before it even left port. It set our invasion plans back by months. Zar shook his head in disbelief. How could one human do so much damage? Krax's fist clenched. That's the thing about Bryant. He's always one step ahead, always finds a way to turn our own strengths against us, like the Battle of Corvus. Vox's head snapped up. I remember that. Our battle group was destroyed, but the report said it was an accident, a reactor malfunction. Krax laughed bitterly. Is that what they told you? No, it was Bryant. He captured one of our ships, used it to infiltrate the battle group. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. He'd sabotaged the reactors, turned our own ships into bombs. The entire battle group lost in minutes. Lost. Man. Zar paled, the implications sinking in. If Bryant could do that to a Loran fleet, what could he do here, on the ground? Vox seemed to be thinking the same thing. We need reinforcements, he growled into the comm. Send every soldier you have, but Krax shook his head. No, it's too risky. If Bryant could infiltrate the shipyards, who's to say he hasn't already compromised our forces here? We could be walking into another trap. Zar shifted uneasily. Then what do? We can't just let him win. Krax was silent for a moment, his eyes calculating. Then, slowly, a cruel smile spread across his face. We use the girl, he said, nodding towards Natalie. She's his weakness. We lure him in, then hit him with everything we've got, including the PSI weapon. Exactly, Krax said. Bryant won't see it coming. It's designed to target their physiology, to overload their primitive nervous systems. One hit, and he'll be writhing on the ground like the animal he is. Zar looked horrified. But sir, using a weapon like that, it's a war crime. It goes against every convention of civilized warfare. Krax rounded on Zar, his eyes blazing. Civilized? You think the humans care about civilized warfare? They're barbarians, savages. They'll do whatever it takes to win. And so will we. Vox nodded slowly, a vicious gleam in his eye. Yes, the PSI weapon. It's perfect. Bryant won't stand a chance. But before they could continue, Lawrence's voice boomed over the intercom once more. Vox, Zar, Krax, I know you can hear me. This is your last chance. Release my daughter and surrender, or I will bring this entire compound down on your heads. Krax snarled into the comm. You arrogant ape. You think you can threaten us? We have your daughter. Surrender, or she dies. There was a moment of silence, then Lawrence's voice again, cold as the void of space. You just don't get it, do you? I'll never surrender, not to you, not to anyone. I'll fight to my last breath. And even then, you won't have beaten me. Krax frowned, unnerved despite himself. There was something in the human's tone, in the set of his features on the view screen, a calm certainty beyond the mere bravado of a cornered foe. It was as if Bryant knew something Krax didn't. You would throw your life away. Krax demanded. For what? You're vastly outnumbered and outgunned. You have no hope of victory here. Lawrence leaned forward, his gaze boring into Krax. My death will be the spark that lights the fire of resistance across the stars. Every human who hears of this day will know that we can stand against you. They will be inspired to rise up and cast off the shackles of your oppression. Krax's eyes widened as the true scope of Bryant's plan became clear. The human wasn't trying to win this battle. He was making himself a martyr, a symbol for his people to rally around. For a moment, Krax almost admired the sheer audacity of it, the brilliance and bravery of this fragile ape who stood alone against the might of an empire, and smiled. Slowly, not quite believing what he was doing, Krax signaled his gunners to stand down. Lawrence Bryant, he said firmly, you have earned a warrior's respect and a warrior's death. I salute you. Bryant inclined his head, a final acknowledgement between foes, then cut the link. Aboard her pod, Natalie watched helplessly as the Luran dreadnought bore down on her father's tiny ship. She screamed and pounded the walls, begging, pleading for the pod's automated systems to turn back. But it forged on, carrying her further and further from the battle, and from the man she loved more than life itself. As the pod accelerated to FTL speeds, Natalie collapsed in her chair, sobbing. She knew what her father's sacrifice meant, what he was buying with his life, but in that moment she wanted nothing more than to be a little girl again, safe in his arms. She squeezed her eyes shut, picturing his face, the pride and love shining in his eyes as he looked at her, even at the end. She clutched his tattered dog tags, all she had left of him. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered a final goodbye. But even as grief threatened to consume her, a flicker of hope took root in her heart. Her father's dream, his vision of a galaxy where humans and Lurans could live in peace, didn't die with him. It lived on in her, and she would spend the rest of her life fighting to make it a reality. As the pod hurtled through the void, carrying the last, best hope of two species, Natalie lifted her chin. She had a feeling the galaxy hadn't seen the last of the Bryant family. And when she was done, the Lurans would rue the day they ever tangled with humanity. Meanwhile, back in the compound, the fight was far from over. Vox and Zar stood in tense silence, waiting for Lawrence to make his move. Suddenly, a chime from Zar's communicator shattered the quiet, making them both jump. Zar frowned at the display, then turned to Vox, his eyes wide. Sir, it's a transmission from Zaxar, our spy in human space, Zar said, his voice tight with urgency. He was cut off as Zaxar's voice crackled over the comm, his words tumbling out in a rush. Commander Vox, I have urgent news. Bryant's attack on your compound, it's not an isolated incident. The humans have launched a coordinated assault on our supply lines and communication hubs across the galaxy. Vox's jaw dropped. What? How is that possible? Why weren't we informed sooner? Zaxar's voice was strained. They're using some kind of new stealth technology. Our sensors can't detect their ships. Bryant must have used it to slip past your defenses. Krax, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. This confirms the rumors I've heard, Krax said, his voice grim. The humans have been developing a secret weapon, a fleet of stealth ships designed for surgical strikes deep in our territory. They call it the Ghost Fleet. Zar's eyes widened. Ghost Fleet? I thought that was just a myth. Krax shook his head. No, it's real. And if the reports are accurate, these ships are crewed by the humans' most elite warriors, including more super soldiers like Bryant. Zar turned to Vox, his voice urgent. Sir, if this is true, we may have severely underestimated the humans' capabilities. Perhaps it's time to consider a diplomatic solution before this war becomes unwinnable. Vox rounded on Zar, his eyes blazing. A diplomatic solution? You dare suggest we surrender to these primates? That's cowardice treason. He jabbed a finger at the screen, where Lawrence's relentless advance played out in grim detail. No, we will fight to the last. We will not rest until every last human is either dead or enslaved. It is the only way to ensure the supremacy of the Loren Empire. But before Zar could respond, the door to the command center exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a blast of concentrated plasma. Lawrence strode through the smoking ruins, his eyes locked on Vox, a predatory smile on his lips. Vox, panicking, snatched up the control unit for the PSI weapon and aimed it at Lawrence, his claws shaking as he depressed the trigger. A crackling beam of psychic energy lanced out, enveloping the human in an aura of sickly green light. But Lawrence kept coming, his pace never slowing. Vox's eyes widened in horror as he realized the weapon was having no effect. Lawrence's smile widened. Nice try, he called out, his voice distorted by the helmet of his suit. But your little toy won't work on me. My armor is designed to deflect electromagnetic attacks. Just another bit of human ingenuity you underestimated. With a blur of motion, Lawrence lunged forward, his fists and feet lashing out in a whirlwind of strikes. Loran guards crumpled like paper dolls before his onslaught, their weapons and armor useless against his enhanced speed and strength. Vox stumbled back, all his bravado evaporating as Lawrence bore down on him, an unstoppable force of nature. Zar, watching the scene unfold in numb horror, could only marvel at the sheer power and determination of this human, a being who would let nothing stand between him and rescuing his child. It was becoming all too clear that the Lorens, in their arrogance, had picked a fight with an enemy they could not hope to defeat, an enemy that, when pushed to the brink, would unleash hell itself to protect what it held dear. As Lawrence smashed through the last line of guards and closed in on Vox and Natalie, Zar found himself wondering if this was how the Loren Empire would fall, not with a whimper, but with a roar of human defiance that would echo across the stars. The fight was far from over, and the Lorens were only beginning to understand the true depth of humanity's resolve. Zar watched in amazement as Lawrence closed in on Vox's position, the human super soldier, an unstoppable force of nature. Vox's eyes widened with fear as he barked into the comm. Cracks. Where are those reinforcements? We need them now. There was a moment of tense silence before Crax's voice crackled over the link. Commander Vox, I'm not sure sending more troops is wise at this point. Bryant has proven he can cut through our forces like a plasma torch through steel. We may need to consider alternative options. Zar saw his chance. He leaned in close to Vox and murmured, Sir, if I may, perhaps we could use the human female as leverage. Offer to release her in exchange for Bryant's surrender and safe passage. It may be our only way out of this. Vox's reptilian eyes darted from the screens to Natalie's bruised face, still defiant despite her injuries. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he nodded curtly. Very well, he muttered. He turned to his remaining guards. Stand down, all of you. Let the human approach. Lawrence strode into the command center a moment later, his armor splattered with Loran blood. He aimed his rifle at Vox's head, his voice cold. Release my daughter. Now. Vox held up a clawed hand. Wait, we are prepared to make a deal. Your offspring's freedom in exchange for your surrender, and a guarantee we can leave this planet alive, Lawrence scoffed. And why should I trust a single word out of your lying mouth? You tortured my daughter. For all I know, this is just another trap. Vox shook his head frantically. No more tricks. Look, we're standing down like you wanted. He gestured to his men, who were lowering their weapons. Just let us go, and the girl is yours. Lawrence's finger tightened on the trigger. Release Natalie first. Then we'll talk about your terms. Just then, an urgent tone sounded from the console. Zar glanced at the display, his eyes widening. Commander, it's a direct transmission from the homeworld, from the Emperor himself. He's demanding to speak with Bryant. Vox and Lawrence stared at each other for a long, tense moment. Then, slowly, Lawrence lowered his rifle. Put him through, he ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing the scarred visage of the Loren Emperor. The Emperor fixed Lawrence with a penetrating gaze. Human, he began, it seems your reputation is well earned. Your actions today have proven most illuminating. Lawrence met the Emperor's stare unflinchingly. I'm not here to impress you. I came for my daughter. So say what you have to say, then let us go." The Emperor leaned forward. "What I have to say is this: the Loran Empire is prepared to discuss terms for a truce between our peoples." Lawrence blinked, taken aback. "A truce? After everything you've done, all the worlds you've invaded, the lives you've destroyed, now you want peace?" The Emperor spread his hands. "Your victories have forced us to reevaluate many things, Bryant. Your species has proven to be a formidable adversary, one that perhaps we should seek to understand rather than conquer." Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "Forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of this sudden change of heart. Your suspicion is understandable," the Emperor conceded. "But the truth is, this war has taken a toll on us as well. Our resources dwindle. Our citizens grow weary of the conflict. There have been rumblings of discontent and even talks of rebellion." He leaned back, his tone more measured. "We find ourselves at a crossroads. We can continue down this path of mutually assured destruction, or we can choose a different way. Imagine what our two species could accomplish if we worked together rather than against each other." As the Emperor spoke, Vox listened in growing disbelief. All his ambitions, his dreams of glory and conquest, were crumbling before his eyes because of the human he had so badly underestimated. Zar glanced at his commander, seeing the despair etched on Vox's face, and felt a twinge of pity. Vox had been a proud warrior, but his pride had blinded him to the truth, that the Lorens were not invincible, that their arrogance would be their downfall. As Lawrence and the Emperor continued their tense negotiation, Zar's communicator chimed urgently. He glanced down, his eyes widening as he read the message scrolling across the screen. "Sir," Zar said, his voice tight with barely suppressed excitement, "I've just received a transmission from the Loran rebel faction. They claim they've been working with human forces to undermine the Empire's war efforts." Vox's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing. "What? Rebels working with humans? Impossible." But Zar shook his head, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "There's more. They say a massive Loran fleet is on its way here, with orders to destroy this facility and everyone in it, including us." Lawrence, overhearing the conversation, tensed. "How long until they arrive?" Zar consulted the message again. "Minutes, perhaps less. We need to evacuate immediately." Lawrence hesitated, torn between his desire to save Natalie and his duty to protect his fellow humans. If the Loran fleet destroyed the compound, countless human prisoners would be killed. Vox, seeing the indecision on Lawrence's face, stepped forward. "Bryant," he said, his voice strained, "I know we've been enemies, but let me help you. I can get you and your daughter to a ship, get you off this planet. In exchange, I want your word that my men and I will be given safe passage." Lawrence stared at Vox, searching his reptilian features for any sign of deceit. Slowly he nodded. "All right, we have a deal. But we need to move fast." As they hurried to make preparations, Krax cleared his throat. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "this situation reminds me of a story I once heard about a group of humans on one of our colonies." Lawrence glanced at him, curious despite the urgency of their predicament. "What happened?" Krax leaned against the wall, his eyes distant. "There was a virus, a plague that swept through the colony. Thousands were infected, dying. Our medical technology couldn't stop it." He paused, shaking his head. "But there was a human research team there, studying the virus. They found a cure, but there wasn't enough time to synthesize it for everyone. They injected themselves with the virus," Krax said quietly, "used their own antibodies to create a serum for the colonists. They sacrificed themselves to save a colony of their supposed enemies. It was ... remarkable." Lawrence was silent for a long moment, considering Krax's words. Perhaps, he said at last, our peoples have more in common than we realized. Maybe, when all this is over, we can find a way to coexist peacefully. Vox, listening to the exchange, found himself nodding in agreement. "Anything is possible," he muttered, surprised at his own words. "But first we need to survive the next few minutes together." The unlikely allies made their way through the compound, the sounds of battle growing ever closer. Vox led them to a hangar bay where a small, battered freighter waited, its engines already humming with power. "This ship will get you past the blockade," Vox said, ushering Lawrence and Natalie aboard. "With any luck, the rebel faction will be able to provide cover for your escape." Lawrence hesitated at the top of the ramp, looking back at Vox and Zar. "What about you? Will you be able to get your people out?" Zar nodded grimly. "We'll manage. Krax and I will coordinate the evacuation of our remaining personnel. You just focus on getting your daughter to safety." The ramp sealed shut, and the ship lifted off. Lawrence and Natalie strapped themselves into the cockpit, Lawrence's hands flying over the controls, coaxing more speed from the vessel as it rocketed away from the compound. Behind them, the Loran fleet descended like a swarm of angry insects, their weapons already blazing. Explosions blossomed across the landscape as the ships opened fire, reducing the prison complex to rubble in a matter of moments. But Lawrence and Natalie were already gone, streaking towards the stars and the safety of human space. As they watched the Loran ships recede in the distance, Natalie reached over and squeezed her father's hand. "Do you think it's true?" she asked softly. "What Crax said about the humans and the virus?" Lawrence nodded slowly. "I believe it. We've always been a species that's willing to sacrifice for others, even our enemies. It's what makes us human." Lawrence said nothing, his eyes fixed on the starscape ahead. But as the ship hurtled onward, he found himself clinging to that hope, that slim chance for a future where humans and Lurans could live side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. But as the ship continued its journey through the vastness of space, Lawrence couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty that pressed down on him. The silence between him and Natalie was filled with the unspoken fears of what lay ahead. They had escaped, but the war was far from over. The idea of peace with the Lurans felt like a distant dream, one that seemed almost impossible after all the bloodshed and betrayal. Yet, as he glanced at his daughter, still bruised and battered but with a spark of determination in her eyes, he knew that they had to believe in that possibility. It was the only way to honor the sacrifices that had been made, to ensure that the future would not be marred by the same cycle of violence and hatred. Natalie, sensing her father's unease, leaned her head against his shoulder. "Dad," she began, her voice tinged with both weariness and resolve, "if there's even a chance for peace, we have to take it. For everyone who didn't make it out, for everyone still fighting, we have to try." Lawrence sighed, wrapping an arm around her and pulling her close. "I know, sweetheart," he replied, his voice soft but filled with the weight of his conviction. "We've seen the worst of what war can do, and it's up to us now to fight for something better. But it won't be easy. The Lorens, they've hurt so many, and there's a lot of anger on both sides. But if Crax and Czar can see it, maybe others can too. Maybe we can find a way." They lapsed into silence once more, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound as they traveled deeper into human-controlled space. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibilities, but Lawrence knew that the path to peace would be fraught with challenges. The Ghost Fleet was a testament to humanity's resolve, but it was also a reminder of how far they had been pushed, how close they had come to losing everything. As they approached the outer reaches of Earth's defenses, the comms crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the cockpit. "Lawrence, this is Admiral Reyes. We've been tracking your escape. Welcome home, old friend." Lawrence felt a surge of relief at the sound of the Admiral's voice. "Thanks, Reyes. It's good to be back. But we have a lot to discuss. The situation with the Lorens, it's more complicated than we thought." There was a pause on the other end before Reyes spoke again, his tone more serious. "I've been briefed on the Ghost Fleet's success, but if you're saying what I think you are, then we're in uncharted territory. We'll need to debrief as soon as you land." Lawrence nodded, even though Reyes couldn't see him. "Understood. We'll be down in a few minutes. And Reyes, there's something else. My daughter, she's been through hell. I need to make sure she's safe before anything else." Reyes' voice softened. "Of course, Lawrence. Take all the time you need. She's priority one. We'll handle the rest." As the communication ended, the ship began its descent toward the docking bay of one of Earth's orbital stations. Natalie looked out at the rapidly approaching station, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She had been through so much, seen things that no one her age should have to endure. But in her heart, she knew that her father's fight was now her own. The future of both species might very well depend on what they did next. The station loomed larger in the viewport, and Natalie felt a sense of finality settle over her. As they touched down, the docking clamps securing the ship, Lawrence unbuckled his harness and turned to his daughter, a rare softness in his eyes. "Natalie, I know you're strong, stronger than I ever imagined. But it's okay to be scared. What we've been through, it's a lot." She met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting a maturity that had been forced upon her far too soon. "I'm scared, Dad, but I also know that we can't give up." "Not now," Lawrence smiled, a mix of pride and sorrow filling him. "You're right. We won't give up. We'll keep fighting for that better future, for peace." They stepped off the ship and into the station, the sterile lights and cool air a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. A group of medics and soldiers were waiting, ready to take Natalie to the medical bay for treatment. Lawrence watched as they led her away, a heavy weight settling in his chest. He had been willing to sacrifice everything for her, and now, in the safety of the station, he felt the full impact of what they had both endured. But there was no time to dwell on it. The fight wasn't over, and there were decisions to be made. As he walked toward the command center, Lawrence knew that the real battle was just beginning. It would take every ounce of his strength, every bit of his cunning, to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. The war with the Lorens had changed, and the future of both species hung in the balance. But as long as there was a chance for peace, no matter how slim, he would fight for it with everything he had. For Natalie, for humanity, and for the possibility that one day the galaxy might know a lasting peace. The doors to the command center slid open, and Lawrence stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was resolute. The war wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about building a future worth fighting for. And Lawrence Bryant would see that future realized, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.